House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 3, titled The Battle of Burning Mill, is out. And we're going to talk about the main themes of the episode as well as a couple of things that you needed to pay attention to. While we're talking about House of the Dragon Season 2, do us a huge favor. Smash that like button, leave us a comment, and hit the subscribe button so we can continue to grow our channel. Welcome to the Sundowners Club. So, House of the Dragon, Episode 3, The Battle of Burning Mill. We ended last week with the death of the Cargill brothers in an emotional battle on Dragonstone. And we pick up this week and we meet some houses in the Riverlands that we haven't seen before. And they are House Blackwood and House Bracken. And they clearly don't like each other. It's kind of like to the American version of the Hatfields and McCoys. They are battling and fighting over property lines. So you see the stones laid out on the ground, and as they're arguing over property lines, you have Davos Blackwood basically say that Aegon is no king, and their house, the Blackwoods, have declared for Queen Rhaenyra, and the Brackens obviously have declared for Aegon. And so as they go to argue and the pushing and shoving, we then cut to a scene that is symbolic of what we're going to talk about in this episode around cycles around the circle. We see different circular patterns in this episode, and we see off in the distance a mill that is literally burning, and you see thousands of bodies on a battlefield with a creek running between it. And we see Aaron Bracken has fallen on the battlefield, has a sword through the neck, and what looks to be Davos Blackwood, not for sure, not confirmed, but it looks like Davos Blackwood is dead as well. But clearly the battle has taken its toll, and that's going to pay off later. So keep in mind and pay attention to House Blackwood, because there are certain characters that you might see down the road that play a big part in the events to come. So pay attention to House Blackwood as we move forward in the Dance of Dragons. We then cut to Dragonstone, and on Dragonstone, Queen Rhaenyra is burying the Cargill twins, and she has a scene with Rhaenys, and Rhaenys is talking to her about maybe reaching out to Alicent, and Rhaenyra is hesitant to do that, and you have a nice moment between Rhaenys and Rhaenyra as they're trying to avoid bloodshed that they know inevitably is going to mean the loss of thousands of lives, especially the free folk and the small folk. And so, that scene's a pretty important one. And then we cut to King's Landing, and we have Sir Criston Cole, and Sir Criston Cole is, nervous about becoming Hand of the King. He knows he's not prepared for it, and he's kind of going through his own crisis, and he has to show up to the small council, which he's late for. And as he does so Aegon is talking about, what's happened with the Battle of the Burning Mill and going to war, and he's eager to go, and this council steers him away from that. And as doing so, Aemond Targaryen also ends up putting his foot down and saying that Aegon needs to stay back at King's Landing. The king doesn't need to put himself at risk. And what's telling is you do see Aegon listening to his brother. He definitely respects the military prowess of his brother, and so he listens to him. And kind of a interesting scene that we see, more character building for Aegon, and we also see the beginning of a rift between Sir Criston Cole and now Hand of the King and Alicent. He's cold towards her, and you can see that back and forth, the nonverbals between the two, which plays out throughout this episode. And so we then leave King's Landing, the small council, and one of the first really cool scenes and shots of this episode is Daemon Targaryen flying on his dragon Caraxes, and he arrives at Harrenhal at night. And we've seen Harrenhal in Game of Thrones, the ruins of Harrenhal, with Tywin Lannister and Arya Stark. And we saw the Great Council in the first shots of episode 1 and season 1 when King Jaehaerys they end up the Great Council naming Viserys as his heir, and so but we've never really seen that much of Harrenhal, and so as Daemon arrives, you get this feeling of darkness and almost a horror element to it, and the haunted. We've heard before about how Harrenhal is cursed and haunted, and we also know from season one that Larys Strong, Clubfoot, um, actually murdered uh, Lionel Strong and Harwin Strong in the fire at Harrenhal. So a lot of bad things happen at Harrenhal. And as Damon shows up, there's water pouring in at night from the rain. It's creepy, it's eerie, and he goes in and he busts the doors open into the main hall, the main dining area, and you see again circular table, the circular themes, the cycle of death and violence, and also the circular patterns. And you see Simon Strong, who is the Castellan of Harrenhal, and Simon Strong basically bows down to Queen Rhaenyra and pledges fealty to Team Black, and Daemon doesn't trust him. He sits down. At this moment, we see a woman with black hair coming walking into the shot, and that is Alice Rivers. And so it's our first introduction to the mysterious character of Alice Rivers that people that have read the books know a lot about, but people that are just watching the show, that's another one to keep your eye on as the story progresses over time, is Alice Rivers. And so Damon gets settled into Harrenhal and doesn't trust anybody, but he's there. And what he's wanting to do is he knows that the key to the Riverlands is Harrenhal. And so he's wanting to set up a garrison at and build an army and have them set up at Harrenhal. And so one of the funny scenes that happened there is Simon Strong is speaking to Damon, and Damon says to call him your grace. And so you don't really know, is Damon playing on the fact that he's married to the queen, or does he see himself as a king? And going off the conversation that he had in the previous episode with Rhaenyra, we don't really know where Damon's head's at. We know he's in a confusing state right now, and he's left Dragonstone. But the being asked to be called Your Grace is an interesting touch. Kind of lets us know a little bit about where Damon's head is at. And so we leave Harrenhal, we go back to King's Landing, and we see another new character that was briefly in season one, episode one, when he got knocked off his horse by Daemon Targaryen at the tourney, and that is Gawain Hightower, Alicent's brother. And he is arrived in King's Landing. He's joining Sir Criston Cole, the Hand of the King, and assembling an army, and wants to be part of the expedition to the Riverlands. And so you have this moment where he comes over, he meets Criston Cole. Does he know what has happened between Criston Cole and Alicent? You're not really sure, but they make you believe that he's close enough with his sister, and they're speaking that maybe she's told him a little bit about what's going on with Criston Cole. So he clearly doesn't respect Criston when he first starts speaking to him, and has an arrogant personality. And so Gawain joins Criston Cole as they depart from King's Landing. And then we head back to Dragonstone, and now Rhaenyra's at her council. She's already spoken to Massaria. This is one of the parts of the episode, like last week's episode, that I thought was the weakest, which is the scenes around Massaria and her role, and the fact that she was integral in setting up the blood and cheese murder of a young child, and Rhaenyra knows this. She ends up setting her free because Daemon gave his word, and now she thanks her for warning her about the Cargyle brother that was coming to kill her. And so she ends up making Massaria part of her court and an advisor to her. Very strange move. Didn't really understand it, but it's a way to bring Massaria closer into the story and the plot lines. And so that's already happened. And you have Rhaenyra at her council, and she's got her council urging her to use her dragons and to strike, because if not, the Team Green and the High Towers are going to strike. Rhaenyra is still holding out hope for peace. She's hesitant to go to war. She's looking for any means that she can to avoid all this bloodshed that she knows is inevitably going to tear the realm apart. And so she's taking advice and counsel, but she's also listening to Rhaenys. And so Rhaenys understands that they need to make some decisions. So Rhaenyra is at this point worried about her children. So she's got Viserys II and she's got Aegon the Younger, the two small blonde-haired children, and then she's got Joffrey, who is probably around middle age at this point, middle-aged child, around 6, 7. And so we saw Joffrey at the funeral for Lucerys last week as his big brother Jace was holding him. And so Rhaenyra knows that she needs to send her children away for safety after what happened to Jaehaerys on in King's Landing in the Red Keep with blood and cheese. And so she tasks Rhaena to do that. And Rhaena obviously has not had a dragon hatch yet, and she feels like this is a way of just removing her from being able to fight alongside her sister Baela. And she doesn't really want to go and take the children and go to the Vale, and then eventually take uh, Viserys II and Aegon the Younger across the Narrow Sea. And so, but she accepts the assignment. And as she's doing that, you see one of the biggest Easter eggs, a literal eggs, um, that we see, and four eggs that are opened up, and three of them look very familiar. So this is where it gets a little confusing for book readers. So in the books, it's strongly implied that years before, there was a person named Alyssa Farman that stole three unhatched dragon eggs from Dragonstone, and they were thought to be the eggs of Dreamfire. And those made their way across the Narrow Sea, which eventually became Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. And so, but in this moment, we see three eggs that look like they're Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal's, that also have a blue egg, a fourth egg, which it would either be Viserys II's egg or it would be Rhaena's egg, which would eventually hatch to be a dragon called Morning. We don't quite know who the fourth egg is yet, but the three eggs look to be the same colors as Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. What makes this interesting as a deviation from the book is that these are a clutch of eggs that we saw Prince Daemon in season one find that came from Syrax, which is Rhaenyra's dragon. So interesting to see what they're going to do with that as Rhaena travels to the Vale to meet Lady Jane Eyre, and also eventually across the Narrow Sea. And what if her egg is the one that is there, that's the blue egg that becomes Morning, then where's Viserys II's egg? So a couple of things that maybe created more questions than they have answers, but she accepts the assignment. She hugs her sister Baela. She then realizes at the end, before she's to leave, that Rhaenyra's given her a great honor and great responsibility to carry on the Targaryen line if something were to befall all of the people who stay behind in the war. And so Rhaena finally understands the importance of that moment only as she's leaving. And so we leave there, and we have probably the first real scene of the series of Helena with Alicent. And normally we see Helena where she has visions and nobody understands her. They don't pay attention to her. But Helena is meeting with her mother, Alicent, and she's talking about, she identifies with the small folk, and how can I lose my child and feel that I should be anything special when all the small folk, they lose children every single day. And so she has a lot of sadness around that, but also, you know, understanding and identifying with the common folk, the common people. It's a good trait of Helena's, but she also speaks to Alicent without Alicent saying anything about her uh, exploits with Kristen Cole. And Helena says, I forgive you, to her mother. Now, is she forgiving her for something else that's going to happen in the future that Helena has foreseen or had a vision about? Or is she saying, I know why you came here to see me, and I know what's burdening you, and I'm forgiving you. So again, it's Helena being able to see what's inside people and maybe have those types of visions and a deeper understanding, especially of her mother. And so an interesting moment. And then we cut to probably a more humorous moment than the producers and directors intended, which is Aegon is putting on armor, and it's not just any armor. It is Valyrian steel armor from the original Aegon, Aegon the Conqueror. His armor is being put on, and it looks silly on Aegon. Now, maybe it's meant to be silly, but he's wearing this armor. It looks too big for him, and he's staring in the mirror. He's talking about going to war. But I think as you see the moments where Aegon is staring in the mirror, he knows he's a fraud. And the way the character and the actor is playing the character of Aegon, he knows he's not up to the task. And he knows he's a fraud, but he can't admit it. And so his Knight's Guard, his King's Guard, who are his friends, by the way, they end up saying we're gonna go to battle. And then when Larys Clubfoot comes in, he speaks to Aegon and says, there are whispers amongst King's Landing that if you were to leave, you're basically handing over power to Aemond and Alicent, that that they would be better rulers than you. And so he's playing upon Aegon's insecurity to get Aegon to not go to battle. And so you see Larys Clubfoot really manipulating. Aegon takes the hook and ends up telling Larys, I am in need of a master whispers. And so, interesting scene there. And so we have another interesting scene in King's Landing that you should have paid attention to. And that is one where Aegon and his friends are going out to take a squire to find his first experience with a woman for the night. And they go to a bar where everybody's drinking. And we meet a character named Ulf. And Ulf is claiming that he is the bastard son of Balon the Brave. Now, you might be wondering, who is Balon the Brave? Balon the Brave was the father of King Viserys I and Daemon Targaryen. So in this sense, he's claiming Targaryen lineage, but we don't know if Ulf is lying or not. He doesn't really have blonde hair. It's grayish. He looks like he's in his 40s, maybe the same age as Daemon. But before he can really elaborate further, Aegon and the Kingsguard come walking in with his squire, and it stops any of the talk about Ulf being, related to Balon the Brave and whether he's telling the truth or not. So, but remember Ulf and his character as we probably will see him again. And so at that point, we see Aegon and his friends going into a brothel, and they find Aemond. He's curled up in the fetal position. Aegon's making fun of him. And in a really interesting moment, you see Aegon go from having this fetal position therapy session to handing the woman over to Aegon and his friends, the squire, for the evening, and getting up and saying, I'm in no further need of her. And his shoulders end up standing up. He's stark naked. And you see the Aemon Targaryen that you really don't want to mess with. And you get a sense that he's not one that's quick to lash out, but everything registers and stays in his mind and his brain for later. So you wonder if that poking that Aegon is doing at Aemon's psyche, is that going to come back and hurt Aegon? You certainly know that Aemon doesn't forget anything. And so we then come back to Harrenhal, and probably the most important scene of the episode is Daemon Targaryen is dealing with the leaks in the roof, and he's in his bed, and he ends up having a dream where the doors are being pounded on, and he opens the doors, and as he's walking down the hall, he goes into a room, and he's having a dream or a vision of a young Rhaenyra. So we see Millie Alcott is back playing young Rhaenyra, and it's a haunting scene where she is sewing the head back on the Prince Jaehaerys, and Daemon has actually got tears in his eyes. It's like he's seeing the sins that he's committed, and he's traumatized by it, and feels like he's being tortured. So, she's basically Rhaenyra. There's a couple things going on here. Rhaenyra is saying, I'm always having to clean up your messes. And at the same time, why is Daemon seeing Rhaenyra as the teenage version of herself? Is that the Rhaenyra that he fell in love with? Is it the Rhaenyra that he felt he could control? and she's not as controllable now as she's grown up and gotten older. That creepy part of Damon and the part that's really hard to like or hard to understand is at play here. But he's also showing the human side of himself by the fact that he's got tears in his eyes and he's obviously tortured by it. He then wakes up and he's standing outside of Harrenhal in front of a weirwood tree. He's dropped his sword and he's standing in front of a weirwood tree. And those that have watched Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, they know that the weirwood trees have a link to the past and to magic. And so, very interesting that he's standing there and he turns around and there's Alice Rivers again. And she says, "You're going to die in this place." And clearly, Damon has a very serious look on his face. And take note of that. Alice Rivers, is she a witch? Does she have magical abilities? What is her story? I think we're going to see a lot more of Alice Rivers. So keep in mind, her role as we move forward with Damon at Harrenhal. And so as we wrap up the episode, what I believe is the weakest part of the episode was Rhaenyra has now decided that she is going to travel via boat to King's Landing, and she is going to try to have a parlay, a conversation in secret with Alicent. So she goes to Massaria. Massaria sets it up for her to make her way in, and she's one of the women of the Sept. So she's wearing that disguise. She goes into the Sept. Again, we have a circular shot overhead of the candles being lit of the circular altar table. So that theme of that circle of violence, circle of death, is something that's been consistent in this episode. And so she sits down and she confronts Alicent, and they have a conversation where she's trying to find peace, and Alicent is not really given much. But then they discussion of that you've taken my birthright, and Alicent says, I didn't lie. He said Aegon. And so she finally asks her, "What did my father say on his deathbed? And did he mention my name?" And Alicent says, "No, he said Aegon." And then she says, "The prince that was promised to unite the realm." When she says that, Rhaenyra knows that Alicent misunderstood what Viserys was saying the whole time. All this stuff has been started. It's been a huge misunderstanding. And then she tells her that, no, that's a story he told about Aegon the Conqueror, a prophecy. And Alicent believes her. But at this point, Alicent says it doesn't matter. And Rhaenyra says it's a mistake. And she says it's not a mistake. Cole is on the march, and Aemon, you know what he is. And that is Alicent telling Rhaenyra that my son, Aemon, can't be stopped. She knows he's a sociopath, and she knows she's lost control over Aemon, probably lost control over Aegon, and Sir Criston Cole is on the march to the Riverlands as well. So she gets up and leaves, and you now see a look on Rhaenyra's face that she knows she's done everything she can to avoid this war, but this is her birthright, and now she knows she's going to war. So to wrap up this episode, there were a lot of things to like about the episode. I really think the scenes with Daemon and Harrenhal and Alice Rivers were good. One of the scenes I didn't mention was around Corlys Valerian and Rhaenys. We got quite a bit of Rhaenys this week. Is that a little bit of foreshadowing around her ultimate fate? I don't know, but Rhaenys having a conversation with Corlys around who will inherit Driftmark, was a smaller scene in the rain. But at the end of the day, this episode was really symbolic of what's to come starting next week, which is the war is broken out. We're going to see dragons. We're going to see massive deaths and casualties. And the first 3 episodes of this season has served as a precursor to trying to avoid war, trying to form alliances, and the jockeying for positions of power within both Team Green and Team Black. All that has kind of been settled now, and now it's time to go to the war of the Dance of the Dragons. We'll be here to cover it. What was your favorite part of the episode? Was it Daemon Targaryen and Harrenhal? Was it the scenes with Rhaenyra and Rhaenys? Was it the scenes with Aegon and Allison and Aemond? What did you like? What did you not like? Let me know what you think as we lead into next week's episode, which we already know the title for. It's called Rook's Rest, which will be a huge battle. So while you're letting us know your thoughts, leaving a comment, smash that like button, hit the notifications bell for future content, and most importantly, hit subscribe so we can continue to grow our channel and TCB.